This is Mom Maintenance, episode 19, the story you're telling about yourself. Welcome to Mom Maintenance, the podcast where we take a few minutes each week to take care of the most important part of motherhood, your brain. So lately, as I've been coaching, I've been thinking a lot about the stories we tell ourselves. Not the stories we tell other people, but the stories we tell internally about who we are. What's really interesting is that most of us don't even realize we're doing it. Over time, we collect experiences. Things our parents said, things our siblings said, comments from teachers, experiences with friends, relationships, successes, failures, embarrassing moments, achievements. Over time, almost without noticing it, we start building a story about ourselves. Maybe your story sounds like, I'm bad with money. I'm not very disciplined. I'm too emotional. I am awkward. I'm not a good mom. Or I'm just a stay-at-home mom. I'm not very good at following through. I'm not the kind of person who can do hard things. Or maybe it's a story about your current circumstances. My childhood messed me up. My marriage is the reason I'm unhappy. I'd be happier if my kids were easier. I can't because of where I live. I can't because I don't have enough money. The problem is that after we've told ourselves these stories long enough, we stop questioning them. We just believe them. We stop seeing them as stories and start seeing them as facts. Years ago, before we opened Crumbl, my story was that I was a stay-at-home mom who had been out of the workforce for so long, there was no way anybody would want to hire me. That was my story. Then when we decided to open Crumbl, my husband and brother-in-law said, "Hey, Anna, we'd like you to be the manager." I panicked because managers are competent people. Managers know what they're doing. Managers have experience. And my story was that I was completely unqualified. Who was I to manage a business? What if I failed? What if everyone found out that I had no idea what I was doing? And what if I let everyone down? But here's what's interesting. The fact was that I had never managed a business before. The story was that I wasn't capable of doing it. Those are two very different things. And because I was willing to do it anyway, I discovered that my story wasn't actually true. I learned, I figured things out, I stretched, I grew. I made so many mistakes. But I became someone capable of doing something I previously thought I couldn't do. I think about this a lot when I compare myself to other women. I've mentioned before that I have these incredible sisters and sisters-in-law. They are talented, creative, fun, capable, and it's so easy to look at their strengths and compare them to areas where I feel weaker. For years, I carried around this story that I wasn't a fun mom, not because I had carefully evaluated all the evidence, but because my version of motherhood looked different from someone else's. The fact was that I did things differently. The story was that different meant worse. And that story didn't help me become a better mom. It didn't motivate me. It didn't inspire me. It just made me feel really bad about myself. I think a lot of us are carrying around stories that aren't serving us. There are stories about our abilities, our worth, stories about our marriages, stories about our kids and what they're going through or who they are, stories about our past. And because we believe those stories are true, our brains start looking for evidence to support them. If I believe I'm failing as a mom, my brain notices every mistake. If I believe I'm not disciplined, my brain notices every time I quit. If I believe people don't like me, my brain notices every awkward interaction. We become detectives searching for evidence that our story is right. And then we wonder why the story keeps getting stronger. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves even make us feel like victims. We're victims of our childhood and our interactions with people while we were growing up. We're victims of our circumstances, victims of relationships we're currently in, victims of what somebody else did. And I get why that's tempting, because if it's someone else's fault, then we don't have to change anything. But there's a cost to that. The moment we become victims of our story, we also become powerless. Because if someone else is holding the pen, then we aren't. And that's a miserable way to live. I'm not saying bad things haven't happened. I'm not saying your circumstances aren't hard. I'm certainly not saying your experiences don't matter. But I am saying that the meaning you've attached to those experiences may not be the only interpretation available. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're learning. Maybe you're not failing. Maybe you're growing. Maybe you're not incapable. Maybe you're just inexperienced. Maybe you're not a bad mom. Maybe you're just a mom who's still figuring things out. So here's the mom maintenance question I want to leave you with today. What story are you telling about yourself? Where do you feel stuck? And what if the thing keeping you stuck isn't your circumstance? What if it's the story you've been telling about it? Because the most powerful thing about a story is that it can be rewritten. You don't have to keep living inside a story that makes you smaller or a story that drains your energy. You don't have to keep believing every thought your brain offers you, no matter how long you've had it. You get to decide what kind of person you're becoming. You get to decide what meaning you give your experiences. You get to decide whether you're going to spend your life reacting to your own story or writing it. And that, my friend, changes everything. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Mom Maintenance. If this resonated with you, share it with another mom who might need the reminder that she is not the story she's been telling herself. I'll talk to you next time.